Hello, and here we are with Tuntrelife again, and today we have with us Hanna Snorradóttir, my
Hello.
awesome, powerful friend, goddess friend, and she has so much inspiration and knowledge to share with us today about the Norse goddess Freyja, but also the Nordic myths and legends and how they are relevant for us today. And I think her story, Hanna's story, is so inspirational because she went from a very male professional world of being an environmental engineer, and then she stepped completely out of it and went into this goddess universe, and just doing that, it's so brave, and it
Thank you.
inspires so much today. I think you're just such a good example to inspire. So can you tell us a little bit, how did that all happen? Like, what happened that you took this enormous step?
Yeah. Well, that was actually, I met a storyteller, Britta Haugen, who was living at the west coast of Denmark. And she had a little flat in Frederiksberg. And at a time, I needed a place to stay. So I was so lucky to be living in her little flat in Frederiksberg. And she was mostly in West Jutland in her house. But sometimes she came to Copenhagen and was telling stories and making courses in ritual dancing. So she was working very deeply with the Nordic mythology, among other stories, also with Greek. But I felt very much connection with the Nordic mythology from the beginning. I had been working also with the Nordic mythology in secondary grammar school. So I was very excited to hear somebody who could actually, live from telling the stories and then opening and unfolding the stories through dance. So we were dancing like, in a circle with alive drums, and we were dancing the story to mirror our lives in the story and, to gain insights and to transform all the stuff that was difficult. And I could really see, yeah, Nordic mythology, there's so much wisdom in it. And there's so much that can help you transform the difficulties of life to something beautiful. So I I got so inspired that I ended up actually, quitting my job and seeking a path where I could live from telling stories and do deepening work with through dance meditations, free dance, and rituals and ceremonies. So that's what I work with today, where I take people on retreats to Iceland, and I'm also very inspired by Nordic shamanism as well. So that is something that I have kind of added on, later on, and then I do like a 12-month program here in Denmark, where people can deepen into uh, the the big myths of the Nordic mythology, and especially within the Nordic goddess tradition, the feminine part of the tradition, that I think we hear too seldom those stories told, and the stories told from the feminine and the goddesses perspective, and as well from, we usually hear it from the aces, from the gods of war perspective, but I try to bring into, how is it for the goddesses, and how is it related also to the oldest manuscripts, because so much has been left out um, in the Big Edda, and it's just like in the myth of creation. There is one letter that makes, the whole meaning different. We have this Árvar halda. In the beginning, there was the big mother, Hel, but somehow it got left out, this little H, and it became Árvar alda, and is often interpreted as, in the beginning, there was emptiness. But alda in Icelandic can also mean like a wave. So that can also be in the beginning was the sound wave or the word. So there are many interpretations, and that's the interesting part. You can interpret it like, in different ways. And in the same creational myth, there were two sentences also left out from the oldest manuscripts, from the Codice Regius and from the Hugsbók. And in the Big Edda, that was just left out. And that is that the two first people, Ask and Embla, they were given their fates by the three, it was witches of fate, they were called, Skirne Norna. And in the Big Edda, those two sentences were left out, and then all of a sudden it was Odin, the father god, the big father god, and his two brothers, Vilja and Ve, that were the ones giving the fate to the first two people. But actually they didn't in the original text. So that's interesting. And why did that happen? That's also an interesting question. Was it so difficult for the patriarchy to even imagine that something could be created through a woman? It's a bit funny to think about it now. I mean, because it's kind of logical that the creation goes through the feminine, but
that is
but at that time that was controversial.
Yes, but it's so fascinating also how you take this back into like way before the Vikings and into the Norse traditions, thousands of years old myths and legends, and how this all connects, and where do you see that these are kind of like, where's the core of this? Can you speak a little bit about that, like before we come into the Norse religions that are very much interpreted from the Viking and the patriarch already? So it would be great to hear you speak more about that.
Yes, there's not much known actually about that, but there are some things that point to that there has been something different. One thing is, for instance, like in this verse from Völvin Spådom, or the foreseeing of the seer, which was a woman, always a woman at that time, and Ár var Halda, and Halda was a goddess from the Samir, from the Sames. Do you say that in English? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Samir. Yeah. And she was a goddess, Mother Earth goddess, who was worshipped until the 1700s. And there are some links between her and Hel, which was probably the mother god, the Mother Earth goddess in the Nordic tradition, from time immemorial. There are so many names of places that relate to Hel. Helland, Helsnes, Helsvågar. And there are so many positive attributes that are assigned to Hel. Helbredelse, which is healing. And also Helli, which is, being holy. And also to Hel, to being whole. That is also, these are all beautiful words that speak about wholeness and healing and, healing powers. And in patriarchy, when the religion of Aces came around 200 after Christ, then she became the goddess of death. And that was not a nice place to go to. And these were like people that were sick, the elders, all those that are like, they were just, kicked out to hell, to hell, really, literally. And then, the warriors, they went to Valhalla, and, they were there in the, an internal, could be eternally drunk and, probably also have sex with the Valkyries and all that. So, and that was just, but that somehow that just doesn't make sense, because if hell was such a bad place, how come we have all these beautiful words and beautiful places that are associated with her? So in that sense, you can see there's something untold in story, right?
Yeah.
And so, but seeing, looking back at other religions, like if you just look at oh, just a moment, somebody is
Okay.
have to open the door.
Okay, we're back. We took a little pause there, and we'll
Yeah.
put all this out. But what you were saying is so fascinating, because it's happened in other cultures, and I've also been researching in the Sami culture a lot. And in the ancient times, it was completely a matriarchal society, and now it's, in the 1700s, when they first kind of get in, the missionaries, and they're documenting it, from that point on, once the Christians get involved, it becomes such a patriarchal society that women are not even allowed to visit the sacred sites. And that same kind of stuff happens like all over the place. So let's talk about that a little bit more in relationship to Freyja, and just what is Freyja, and talk a little bit about the Freyja energies, and then kind of tie that back in of what they did to Freyja. She becomes the goddess of death,
Yeah, Freyja was a part of the Vanir, and the Vanir, they were the gods and the goddesses of love. So they were like fertility gods, and the whole society around that was a society of where you were looking at nature within its cyclic nature. So all the cyclic nature, both of the seasons and of the moon phases, and also of within the female like menstruation circle and all that, that was all something that was really honored. And Freyja was the vulva. She was the biggest shaman, at the same time as she was the goddess of love within the Vanir. And the vulva was always female. And she, her way of doing shamanism was called sight. And it was a way of coming into trance to be able to foresee things and to help people heal situations and stuff like that. So it was very shamanistic in nature. And she was always with 9 women. In the end, men were also allowed in the circle. And these women were singing, around Freyja, which was on, like, she was sitting on an altar, or front of an altar in a, like, in a little throne, kind of a throne. And then she was the one, like, taking in the songs of this group of 9 women, and then 9 women and men, and then foreseeing what was to be told for the people that were participating in these ceremonies. And actually, there are many hypotheses that that maybe Folksvang, which was the place where people went when they died, to Freyja, that Folksvang was probably the place where everyone went, and it means also the place for the people. So that kind of makes sense. Yeah. And Freyja was also the goddess of all elements. She got this beautiful necklace, Brisingar of gold, and put it, around her neck, and, it dwelled there by her heart. So this was like her heart gold. So in that sense, she was a little bit like Bridget, the Celtic goddess, with a flame in her heart. She just had this necklace instead. And she got this necklace actually by sleeping with 4 dwarves. They were master makers of jewelry. And in the union with these dwarves, with the masculine element, she unfolded all the different elements within her. So she is, and Freyja is actually a title. It means, it's like, it means our vår frue. I'm not sure how it's translated to English.
Lady, right?
Our Lady, exactly. So you can say that all the Nordic goddesses are in a way, under this paraply, which is, or this umbrella that is Freyja. And there is also the story of Gullveig, which is also one of Freyja's attributes. And she was a big vulva by the Vanir, and she came over to the society that was patriarchal at that time, and that was the society of the Aces or Aesir. And she was, doing her sorcery, and that just didn't appeal to the patriarchs. So she got stabbed and burned, but she just always, she was resurrected. And that happened 3 times. And it started a war between the Vanir and the Aesir. And that was the first war in the world. However, it was probably not the first war in the world, but it was the first war in the world of the Vanir, because they were peaceful people.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of interesting to think of that. So yeah, so Freyja is very interesting to work with in that way, that she's so related to the Nordic shamanism. So yeah, so here she has really many aspects. And yes, she has the element of death also, because she was the goddess of all the elements. And she was also Valkyrie. And in the original meaning, that was probably something else than what the Viking put into it.
Yeah,
because
about the Valkyries and who they were, and yeah.
And
yeah, because the with the Vikings, Freyja was the one taking half of the fallen man to Folksvang. And in the original meaning, it may have been that, because Valur, Val, in Icelandic means it's a bird. It's a falcon. And Kyrja, it means to sing. And like in the old traditions, if you look at like Isis, that also had the wings.
Yeah.
She was, and Freyja had this, like wings, or like this ham of a falcon, where she could, she could change, and she could, shape shift and go between dimensions and worlds. And in a sense, you could also say she was like the bird who sang the last song for the dead people. And then she took them into her, embraced them and took them to Folksvang, to her place. So I think it's a nicer interpretation than her having half of the slaughtered man in the field.
It's so great to hear you take it to that, like the real meaning of the words also. It's so beautiful. And I am wondering, when you talk about the Valkyries and the meaning of the word, does that must also translate into the word Valhalla, which would be like the meaning of the heaven or something in Norse mythology? I believe.
That may be, yeah. It may be that is kind of, has stemmed originally from Freyja and then, evolved into, or, it has been transformed into something else with Odin. Yeah. So, yeah.
It's very likely, because that just seems to be how these things always happen. It starts as one thing, and then as the patriarchal influences take over, it just is morphed into something. And you see it in like the Druid traditions, the Scottish traditions, and everything, where to the point where Merlin, had an equally powerful feminine side, Gwendolyn. Who was supposed to be just as powerful as a shaman or druid as Merlin, but you don't ever hear about her. And
it's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same, because we hear about Odin and his shamanism. The thing is, in the stories, he was probably somebody who learned that. He was somebody who learned that from Freyja.
Yes, that's what we understand.
Right.
He was apprentice of Freyja.
He was.
But he just didn't know how to deal with the power of shamanism. So he just turned it always against his enemies. That wasn't the meaning with being a shaman at all. So, yeah.
Maybe he was not mature enough to deal with the wisdom.
Probably not. He was like a god who people never knew where they had him. They worshipped him and they hoped, oh, please, that you help me. But there are so many stories of Odin turning against people that he before helped and stuff like that. But it was a really awful. Sorry.
He could be unpredictable in that way.
Yes, absolutely. But there are really horrific stories of human offerings to Odin. Yeah.
I think in a way it's symbolic of probably what happened to shamanism. It originated as something that was being used for good and healing, and then you had people that started to abuse it, and then it collapsed over time. It became
that's so beautiful. Yeah. I think that's likely.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So
where else do we want to go here? Let's talk about the course that you're offering. Just tell us a little bit about that. What people can learn there. How
I do courses. I take people on retreats to Iceland. Now I will have a retreat from the 8th to the 13th of June. And we go to a very powerful place in the so-called Golden Triangle. So we live in a place close to Gullfoss, the waterfall, and Geysir. And we are working with Freyja in depth. So we're working with her attributes, we are dancing them for dance meditations to deepen into the work, and also to come into a sense of a trance, so that we can also, leave our mind, everyday minds, and open up to a greater wisdom. So it's both that we are relating to the wisdom of the myth of Freyja, and also to reflect it in our own inner wisdom, and also what we open up to, through the dance. That something can, like Einstein said, you have to have another mindset, to solve your problems. So in that way, if you're dancing or you're doing something else than you're used to, you can open up to a whole new dimension. And we're also working with shamanism, with sight, both where I'm talking about what it is, but also trying it out in reality. And we will be I will be bringing my shamanic drum. So I'm taking people also on shamanic journeys. We will be working with the Freyja's totem animals, and then I will do also a journey, drum journey where people can find their own totem animals. And if they have an unsolved question, they can, ask their guide, or their totem animal, or their guides to guide them to an answer or to an opening.
Yeah.
So, and then we will be also going on tours where we are seeing both Gullfoss and Geysir and Þingvellir, where the first parliament in the world was actually established. And it's a beautiful place, a very powerful place. And then we go to an explosion crater, which has a little lake, turquoise lake on the bottom, which is also like just, going down to Mother Earth, really. It's really beautiful. So we will be seeing a lot of places, and we will be going around in stillness when we're living in these places. And then we will be going for walks in the neighborhood of the beautiful summer house where we are staying. And there's possibility for horse riding and stuff like that as well. So
this sounds like such an amazing experience, and you're going to have to tell everyone where they can find information about this as well, and how to sign up for your course.
Yeah,
we will link to it, definitely.
We can put a
but
link
you can
below
also
this video
it
and on our website. Just if
that
you
would be great.
you can do it.
That would be great. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to do a storytelling education.
Yes.
Within the Nordic wisdom tradition. And the reason I'm doing that is that at a time I thought I should be, well, a lot of people were actually asking me, why don't you come to a school and talk about these things? Nobody tells about these things. And, like in history classes, we only get to know about, the patriarchal history, but not what was before. And how things have been changed, how the symbolic meanings have been changed. And others have asked me, why don't you use this with, like patients, or, in the work with people that have some issues, psychologically or something. And I've always been, well, I'm not educated, in that field. I'm going to companies sometimes, and then I take bits and pieces of my stories, or I do these retreats and these 12-month programs. And then I thought, well, maybe I'm not the one doing all that stuff, but to teach people, that are teachers, that are kindergarten teachers, that are, psychologists or psychiatrists, or whatever it is, maybe I should teach them how to use these stories and bring them, into their work.
Yep.
So that's why I decided, well, I will do this education, and I'm writing on a book now.
Yes.
Seeing the stories from the perspective of the goddesses.
That's so beautiful. Yeah.
And like the oldest, as far back as I can trace it, to the matrilinear societies, before the patriarchy, before the gods of war, the aces. And also I think it's so important to tell the stories from the feminine's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I've read a lot of books of Nordic mythology, and mostly written by men, and it's always from the eyes of the war gods, and it's always from the perspective of the males. And it's crazy somehow to read this, because I mean, many of them, they're really beautifully written, but it's like the goddesses are just like objects in the in the power games of the males. And I would like to hear their voice, and I've always been searching for that. And since I haven't found it, I guess I'm the one that has to write it, right? Since I'm complaining about it, I guess I must be the one. Sacrifice myself. No. And so that's why I'm starting this education on the 7th of May in Copenhagen. and then I will do another or this, another group in Aarhus in September.
Yes.
And
Well, did
another
you
thing
do
that
a course, or is it an online course, or it is?
It is actually no, not an online, unfortunately. Maybe I will do that. I will evolve, not be so old Nordic.
That would be the next step.
Exactly. Yeah.
For that. Yeah.
But what I also find is interesting is also seeing the stories from the perspective of the Yera, the giants, which are more than nature, nature people, like the indigenous people.
Wow.
Seeing the stories from their perspective makes the stories, same stories really different. You see this, see them in a whole new way.
This is very. It
So
would be the same as the Jotun.
yeah, Jotun, exactly. Yes.
Very interesting. I never thought of it in that way. So it's really, really another perspective to the story that we.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really, you start to see that very often, Thor is just going to Urgo, to the place of the indigenous people or the Jotun, and he's hitting on them with his Mjolnir, with his hammer.
Really.
And you're sort of like, why is he going there? I mean, they haven't done anything. So, so that's kind of interesting.
It's puzzling.
Yeah.
It makes you think, though, what was that maybe possibly the original interpretation has been lost, and that the way it was written in a poem or in the in the stories, that the original interpretation wasn't known, so they just made it into what they thought it was, and that Thor was using his hammer for evil. That's what you would think of a hammer as being used for, but maybe it had a totally other purpose at the beginning, and that all of these stories had a different interpretation and meaning at the beginning. I think it's
yeah. And if you start seeing it from this perspective, you can start to, because the interesting thing about these old stories and how you can use them today is also to reflect these stories on society today. And if you do that, you start to see, well, if you look at the gods of war as, us in the Western world, and how are we treating indigenous people? We've had all the flames in Amazonas, all these, the meat industry, that's very powerful in Brazil. And, they are like the gods of war, burning the forest of the indigenous people of the Jotun.
I'm really glad that you
interesting.
bring it back to what we can actually learn from all these stories, how this is relevant for us today. There is so much ancient wisdom in it that we kind of tend to forget, and that people actually lived on this earth before, and they made a lot of experiences, and we have a lot to learn from them. And I think if there is like one goddess you say that we should really kind of like focus on now, like to keep, what would be like your favorite for inspiration in this time that we live?
Yeah.
Freya, maybe.
I would say.
Yeah, it is Freyja. Yeah,
I would,
because she's so much the goddess of wholeness as well. I also like her a lot because she has also this darkness to her, and this is what she's of course been assigned with time. But there's the wholeness also in her. But both of them, yeah, these are actually the two of my favorites.
But thank you so much for being such a sport and doing the interview with us. It's been amazing, and we'll put links for all your courses and your webpage under. And just thank you so much. It's so inspiring and very, very. I just feel so creative and so much alive, from hearing all these stories. So yeah, can't wait for Iceland. and coming up there and joining your course.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you in Iceland.
Yes.
And thank you so much for inviting me. It's such an honor.
It's wonderful to have you here. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. And
Thank
goodbye.
you.
Bye.